an AppleVis original.
Hi there, and welcome to the AppleVis Extra. My name is Dave Nason, and we have what I think is going to be a really interesting conversation today. I'm joined by four great guests to chat about Android and Apple. That's right, I said Android on the AppleVis Extra podcast. We just want to have a chat about where these two systems are at this stage, what they're like from an accessibility point of view. And, to do that, we have a couple of guests who primarily use Android, a couple of guests who primarily use iOS. So I'm delighted to welcome my four guests. First of all, I have Steve Nutt from Computer Room Services. Hiya, Steve. How are you?
Hi, Dave. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am very well. We also have Warren Carr from the new Blind Android Users podcast and the mailing list, I believe, as well. How are you today, Warren?
Glad to be here. Thank you so much, David.
It's great to have you and great to have your voices on the show. And two very familiar voices to AppleVis podcast listeners. We have Alex Hall. How are you these days? Alex, it's been a while since we had you on.
It has been, but I'm glad to be back.
Great to have you. And of course, Scott Davert, who is regularly on this show as well. And great to have you again, Scott.
Oh, it's great to be here. And it's great to do a podcast with a couple of gentlemen that I've never done a podcast with before. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. I'm going to quickly ask each of you just to say kind of what is your primary system. I think we'll probably know that, but also then to what extent you have knowledge or experience with the other system. So I'll start with you, Alex. You're iOS, I'm sure, primarily. So how long have you been in the iOS world, and have you tried or have you dabbled with Android?
Yep, I hope the dog in the background doesn't distract anyone too much. Sorry. I've been using iOS since my iPod Touch way back in 2010, I think late 2010. I remember upgrading to iOS 4.1, so that kind of gives you some context there. And I've been pretty much a daily user of it since. Last year, I did try Android. It was the year before. I think it was last year. Anyway, I tried Android for a little while. I got myself an older Pixel. I think it was the Pixel 1, I believe. I just found it for cheap and gave it a shot. So I was playing with not 12. I think I was on 10 at that point. But, played with it for a while, played with all the options. I installed my favorite synthesizer, good old eSpeak, and had a lot of fun with that. I was just before all the Braille keyboard stuff came out and the new gestures came out, so I did miss that, and I haven't played with it as much since those upgrades. But I have basic experience with Android, but I'd consider myself quite well versed on the iOS side of things.
Very good. Warren, how about yourself? What's your history with Android and briefly, and any experience with iOS?
Well, I am the Android evangelist and enthusiast, so that tells you who I am. I primarily use Android and started back on Android back in 2011. It was a very difficult time when I got started. Prior to that, though, I was using iOS, and thanks to you guys, the AppleVis website was what got me going on the Apple side of things. And in 2011, I tried Android, almost went back to iOS, and I kept going at that, and it's become my go-to, and that's what I use. I do have some iPhones, from years ago. I think I probably had like 5 or 6 of those, but those were primarily like older versions, and I think my current one is now the 7 Plus. I have like a 256 gig version of that, and so that's where I'm at. I'm not sure if I want to get any more from that, but I think I might maybe get like a 10 or 11 or something later on.
Sounds good. So long-time evangelist for Android. We'll skip back across the aisle to Scott. What's your history?
Well, primarily iOS. I've been running iOS since 2011. I started during the days of iOS 4 and CDMA. That was when they decided to bring Verizon on board with the iPhone 4. And immediately I jumped onto iOS 5 beta because there were some fixes and some other Braille things that I had pretty much immediately started testing. And I've had a lot of iOS devices over the years and still do. Android, I've kind of tried it off and on over the years, and it got very frustrating in the beginning, and we'll get into this more in the show later, but it has come a long way. I'll say that for it.
Yeah, I think that will be something we'll be saying. All right, we'll be discussing for sure. And Steve, I know you know both systems quite well, don't you? But Android is your main thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So I started with an iPhone 3GS. So that's how long I go back. So started with iPhone. I sort of liked it, and I thought it was really good. It was accessible at the time, but I didn't like the closedness of the system. I didn't like the fact that you couldn't just stick an MP3 file on it and make a ringtone of it. I didn't like that you couldn't just plug it into a PC and make a drive and just copy stuff over. And when Android came along, I was really excited, and I started with ice cream sandwich, I think. And it was really difficult because you had to put your finger exactly where you where you needed to tap and things like that. But I thought, I'm going to stick with this Android thing because it's exciting. And I just carried on with Android. But I also use iPhone still on a fairly regular basis, on a daily basis almost, because I train people on iPhone as well as part of my job. And also my wife is an iPhone lady. She prefers iPhone. And because I'm technical support in the house, I thought I'd better keep knowing about iPhone. So I'm pretty well versed in both platforms, but my primary platform is definitely Android.
I think we all know that feeling of being tech support in the household. Like myself, I've been using iOS since the 3GS, and just stayed with it all the years. But I've dabbled in Android a couple of times, like with I remember the Nexus 7 tablet. That was kind of a nice, cheap way to just try it out back in the day. And but I found with that, because I find if I'm just have a device like that, I don't end up using it, maybe because I also had the iPad, and it was just easier when I really wanted to do something to pick that up. So then at one point I picked up a Nexus 4 and tried it for a full month. I just switched. That's probably the biggest kind of experiment I've done in that sense. But it's still quite a long time ago, so I don't think it was then where it is now, And now I do have an old, a fairly old, it's a Samsung J6 Plus or Galaxy J6 Plus, which is my work phone, but it's on Android 10. So I kind of feel like, I can make certain comparisons, but I'm aware I'm not comparing like with like when I'm comparing a J6 Plus maybe with an iPhone 12. But still, it's trying to at least get some understanding of it. Thanks everyone. So I suppose the question then is, because I think for a long time, and I'm sure you guys would all have heard this, we would have said, or a lot of people would have advised, and I know I would have, if somebody came to us and said, which one should I get as a blind person? A lot of people said, if you're depending on screen readers, iOS is the safer bet. It's the more advanced in terms of accessibility, and the voiceover was more advanced. I get the feeling you guys, especially Warren and Steve, would argue that's not the case anymore, that Android, you would acknowledge that there was a time Android was behind, but you'd say it's caught up now. Is that right?
I think that before Android introduced multi-finger gestures, which is one of the biggest things people were arguing about, because iOS had the double finger, double tap with two fingers, the magic tap, as they call it. Before Android introduced the two finger, the multi-finger gestures, maybe there could have been an argument for, hey, I can pause my alt media by just tapping, rather than finding the pause button and things like that. I think there were weak arguments, but people did seem to like it because they've got into iPhone first. But since multi-finger gestures and Braille inputs, Braille screen input has come to Android and so on, I don't think there's much to argue about. The only very, very minor downside, I would say, to Android, and it is a very minor downside, and it doesn't bother me, is that, for example, TalkBack 9.1 is now out, apparently, but we don't have it in the UK. So Android still seems to be a little bit fragmented in that you don't get all the updates at the same time. And with iOS, you definitely do. So that's the only minor downside, I would say. But generally, I would say that in terms of choosing whether it's Android or iPhone, I think personally it's a lifestyle choice rather than an accessibility choice.
Okay, cool. What about things like the responsiveness of TalkBack? Because I know when I tried it before, like I say, it wasn't at the level it is now probably, but I found it wasn't as responsive. Or would you say it has caught up in that sense in terms of TalkBack just working as you would expect and being responsive to when you swipe and so on?
I will say so. And one of the things that is worth mentioning here is the fact that what happens is that sometimes it all depends on the phone that one is using and a talkback on. If I pick up a $20 phone, and believe it or not, I had a $20 phone here in my collection. I think it was the LG Sunrise or something like that. I don't remember what it is now, somewhere in the drawer. Now, I cannot compare the responsiveness of that phone to, maybe like your J6 Plus, David, or even my Pixel phone. I have my Pixel. I have a collection of the Pixel phone. I have every Pixel phone out there except the 5 and the 4 for a 5G. But other than that, I have every Google phone, starting from the very first one, the HTC Dream. And so what it is that TalkBack is very responsive, and it depends on the phone. If you get a phone that's like a very low tier phone and all of that, it may be a little bit sluggish, and sometimes it also depends on what we call the launcher. So it's very important that we clarify those things, because a lot of times people kind of just dump these statements out there and therefore get blind people scared to try Android, and it's no longer true. And it all depends on the type of phone you get. And so our recommendation is always to at least get a mid-range, not go for a $20 phone like the LG Sunrise.
And also, Warren, wouldn't you say if you put something like eSpeak on a Pixel, it's going to be more responsive than the iPhone?
That is true.
Because the eSpeak is so lightweight, the TTS is so lightweight in terms of memory, because iPhone only uses the human concatenated voices like Daniel and those nuanced voices. And even the iPhone lags. And my iPhone 12 Pro, which I've got, lags in comparison with my Pixel with eSpeak on it or Eloquence on it.
Really? I have to say, I notice a zero lag on my iPhone 12 mini, but yeah.
I know it's lag on any iPhone, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Compared to eSpeak, yeah.
I can imagine. I know eSpeak is a very, very light,
very responsive. Yeah. Just like Eloquence, maybe even more responsive than Eloquence.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I would agree.
Well, I think that when I briefly played with an S10 not long ago with the newest upgrade that came out in January, I think it was January, right? It wasn't February. It must have been January. It seemed like the responsiveness had kind of gone down a little bit, but that could have been the S10. I don't know enough to...
What TTS were you using? If you were using Samsung TTS, it's horrible. It's really slow.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I was using. And then but then I switched to Tom and Vocalizer, and it's doing the same thing.
Wow. I mean, the problem is with Apple, you've got one manufacturer controlling the software and the hardware. And with Google, they haven't really got a chance because they've got all these, as Warren said, these $20 phones coming out, and you can't compare the responsiveness of a $20 phone to an iPhone 6 or 7 or even an iPhone 12. And that's where I think people go wrong.
Sorry. Yeah, and the other thing is with the Android, with some of the cheaper tablets on the market, at least here in the U.S., like Brailleback doesn't work with them. You can install it on there, but when you try to run it, it just crashes. So you really have to go for like a flagship type phone to get a really good experience. I haven't found a cheaper model that works well, which is one of the selling points, no pun intended, of Android is that, devices are supposed to be cheaper. And I mean,
that's
the
weird,
Samsung devices aren't.
I found that I've had a Nokia 5.1 here, which is fairly cheap. It's like £180 in the UK, and Brailleback works just fine on it.
Huh.
Yeah, I have a Nokia, 4.2 here that I think I got for less than $100. And, Brailleback works on it. I think what Scott is talking about, if you're talking about tablets like the On or an N from Walmart, and, it comes equipped with the Play Store and all of that. Now, what happens is that some of those, tablets, and when it comes to tablets, I always advise people, stay away from tablets if you're trying to play with Android. Is not the best way to go. You're better off getting a $50 phone
I agree.
And, we see a lot of those, on the market now, especially from Nokia. And a lot of those guys have those type of phones. So the best thing to experience or try an Android phone or Android device is not necessarily the tablet. It's not a good way to test Android. So get a real phone instead and just play with it. Put it on Wi-Fi. You don't need a SIM card in it, and you'll be good to go.
Alex, what was your general high level impression when you tried Android versus iOS?
My general impression, I guess, was that I still preferred iOS. There were some things that I wish it would learn from Android. There were some really neat features. One of the things that kind of struck me was the context menus. You can bring up quick actions to do on a thing, like dismiss a notification, or you can bring up quick actions to do with the screen reader. So repeat last phrase, spell last phrase, stuff like that. And while iOS can do those, you have to know the gestures. Android, if you forget this is a 2-finger or a 3-finger tap or whatever it is, it doesn't matter because you can just bring up the menu. Whereas iOS, if you don't know the gesture, you're kind of out of luck. So, there were some nice things. I really liked having eSpeak. You can install whatever voices you want. I like that. But overall, just for the overall efficiency, I guess, of the system. Sorry, Cosby's dreaming in the background there. I don't know if the mic's picking that up. In general, though, I found iOS to be more efficient. I could get more done with it more quickly. And we can get into all this at a later point too, but what everyone was talking about kind of is a blessing and a curse. You can get a cheap Android device and it's probably going to work. But if you're a Braille user and you get a cheap Android device thinking you'll just try it out, you get it home and all of a sudden BrailleBack doesn't work. Or if you're deaf, how do you set it up because you can't hear the speech? If you get an iPhone, it's going to cost you more upfront, but when you get it home, it already has all the Braille drivers. It already has everything you're going to need, so you don't have to worry about which model did I get, which manufacturer, do I need a different launcher, do I need to, root it to install basic Android to get this working or that working? Why can't I use a Braille display? Oh, I've got to go to the thing. Now I've got to set up my account and I have to install the thing before I can use Braille. There's just so many extra things that you have to worry about and do and research that while there's a lot of choice, there can also be a lot of headache if you're not an advanced user that knows what they're doing.
Is that
Sorry,
the case
Alex.
about Braille that BrailleBack doesn't come pre-installed? Is that the case?
That might, I don't know. I haven't looked at that in a while. I might be mistaken about that.
It is something I've heard.
Stephen Warren
as well.
can correct me.
Yeah, well, here, and you're right, Alex, like I always say, the problem, or if there's any one area that, Android could be lagging, lagging behind, I always say this. And if you are someone who is deaf or, have some hearing problems and you rely more on Braille, probably Android may not necessarily be your first choice because of that. Support is not quite there as we would like it to be. I'm an Android enthusiast, and I could say this, Apple has it done right with the Braille, but with the BrailleBack, you have to install it. It doesn't come pre-installed. Now, though, things are changing as it's becoming, baked into the system. And I hope this is how it continues to be with every other phone out there. But I can say that this is going to be...
I'm hoping, Warren, that Braille is going to be in the accessibility suite eventually. I mean, that's the way to go, isn't it?
Yes, it is in that accessibility suite. It's part of it, but like we said, probably one is to get a phone that is a little bit higher, or it all depends on the manufacturer. And this is the freedom in Android that we, manufacturers have. They could choose to not include certain things, which is a curse and a blessing, like Alex was saying. So you see that across the board from different manufacturer to another. So it all depends on where you're getting your phone from. But yeah, most Android phones, you'll have to install that BrailleBack from the Play Store. And so if you're deaf and you bring that phone home, you're not going to get that support from boot up. So that's the problem. And I know we've been talking about this on some of our mailing lists and, sending Google feedback about that. And I'm thinking they're going to be doing something about it.
On the flip side, though, Warren, now iOS have broken Braille in 14.4. They've pretty much broken it for newer HID devices, as I'm sure Scott can verify. The thing about Android is that if they break Braille, you don't have to wait for an operating system update. All you've got to wait for is an update to Brailleback, which can be pretty quick. Yeah. But now you've got to wait for Apple. You've got to wait for a whole OS update if they break a minor thing in VoiceOver/Braille.
Well, and one of the things that's actually one of the positive things about Android. You can look at it as a positive or a negative, right? It's a positive because you're right. They can update Brailleback whenever they want to. They don't regularly, but they could. Yeah. And so, when an issue like this comes up, it's terrible, and there are issues right now with reading books on iOS. And, we have this turn pages while panning option for Braille displays, which is fantastic when it works.
When it works.
I don't know what they quit. Apple quit saying it just works, and I'm glad they did because, it doesn't always. But it's kind of an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time, depending on what you're looking at. Because I still feel that there should be some types of keyboard commands that are consistent across Braille displays, or if nothing else. Okay, fine. You can have whatever command structure you want, but at least have the commands that are available be consistent. Because I know from testing different Braille devices that that's not always the case on Android. One of the other things that I had trouble with was having to turn the page. Now, even with the when I'm reading a book, so on iOS, even now I can turn the page with one command and it goes on to the next page. So I don't have to take my hands off the keyboard and move over to the touch screen. And as far as I know, there's no command that you can consistently do on the Braille display to change those pages. You have to take your hands off the display and then, do the gesture.
It depends on the Braille display, Scott. On the Vario Ultra, for example, you can do space with dots 4/6 and space with dot 1/3 to go to previous and next page.
That's handy.
Oh, that's really neat.
I didn't test for the Vario Ultra.
Yeah. Best Braille display in the world, by the way.
Send me one, Steve. Would you send me one of those, bro?
Yeah. So
the Vario Ultra was a great device.
Yeah.
So but in general, mainstream, like what Scott is saying, I think that would be, if there's any drawback to Android, would be that inability to pan those pages if you have a Braille display that doesn't support that panning. And I think a fix has to be from Brailleback to make sure that this is all across the board when it comes to the various displays out there. And I'm sure those guys are working on that. And that's the only thing, though, that I think that we're lacking.
No. The other one, Warren, is that you can't bring up the local or global context menu from the Braille display.
Oh no, you can't.
No, you can't.
Oh.
There's no command. Victor Soren confirmed it to me because I asked on the Vario Ultra list, and he said there's no command to bring up the talkback menu with a Braille display unless you can.
See, I don't use my Braille display that much. I only use it for reading, and I don't. I'm a on-screen keyboard user first. So I don't even use a Bluetooth keyboard. What I like though with the new Braille talkback Braille keyboard, I've been using that fairly, a lot. Yeah.
But I like a proper Braille display, to be honest, is my preference. If I'm going to do Braille, I don't like Braille screen input.
I don't actually like Braille screen input either, personally. No. But, and that's a real productivity loser if you're dependent on Braille only. If you're a speech user and you're using your touchscreen, whatever, you just reach over and do the gestures to bring up those context menus. But it takes a lot of time. If you're just trying to rely solely on Braille, you're already going to be likely slower than as a speech user. So anytime you have to take your hands off that display, you're going to be slowed down that much more. So, I really hope they work on it because, to be perfectly honest with you, I've wanted to give Android an honest try for several years now, but because I'm so reliant on Braille, I can't do it yet. It's been something I've always wanted to do, but haven't been able to.
It's interesting. And Scott, it sounds like maybe feature-wise, you're pretty happy with iOS, but on the trouble with iOS is the bugs, really, is it? Is that kind of where iOS falls down on Braille more so than actually what it offers?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're both frustrating just in different ways. I guess that's every operating system and every phone, right? There's nothing that's perfect.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of issues on iOS, and they're not fixing them. You look at the problems that people were having with typing and this whole voiceover announcing that you're in a text field, and here's your insertion point and all that stuff. What happens is if you don't hear that and you're typing along, your cursor gets bounced backwards. And this is happening several times in, say, a longer email. That's a major problem, and it's been around since 14.0, and they haven't even... they're trying to pass it off now as expected behavior. I'm sorry, but I don't really consider something that randomly announces itself expected behavior that I should be putting up with, whether it's in a kit or an iOS device, But it really is from I would say from a speech user standpoint, and I can still do that if I have to, I'm kind of starting to like some of these newer things that are coming on board with TalkBack and the gestures. Now they have the multi-gestures, but they have more gestures available than iOS has, for one thing. And for another, like when I ran this upgrade back in January, there's a nice little handy thing on the top of the TalkBack menu that says, "What's new?" And you double tap on that, and it walks you through everything that's new with TalkBack in the current version of TalkBack. So iOS
can I
go on the web and figure that out,
Can I also point out, Scott, the TalkBack tutorial as well, which actually teaches you the gestures, whereas iOS has this practice gesture mode, but you have to know what the gestures are.
Yeah.
That's 100% correct.
I agree with you both on that one, because every year when the new iOS comes out, they often have some cool new features in there, but you have to go hunting for them. That what's new would be so helpful.
Yeah, because that's something that TalkBack has really done nicely. And, right from within the app itself, you could find all of that. And if you're just starting and you don't know TalkBack, you're coming to TalkBack for the very first time as an Android user, you could just learn those right in there within the app itself. And I think whoever thought of that was brilliant.
Yeah. And you moved us kind of onto gestures there, Scott, which I wanted to do because it's an area I think we've seen a lot of development in both areas, really. I think one of the biggest improvements iOS has made in the last couple of years is the ability to customize your gestures and change them. Now, you don't have complete freedom. There's still some that they say, no, this one's locked in, but for the most part, you can change quite a lot of gestures.
Android's had that forever, by the way.
And Steve, if I said multi-finger gestures, you'd say multi-finger gestures is an improvement in Android, and I'd say, iOS has had that forever, by the way. So, that's what I mean by they're both totally improving in their own ways.
I agree.
They borrow from each other, and I'm glad to see that going on. Android borrows from iOS and iOS borrows from Android. And I think the happy user is those of us who rely on these things. So I don't care what they borrow from each other. As long as it makes things easier on either side of the aisle, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I agree with Warren. I don't really care if Android invented it, if iOS invented it. I don't care if the queen bee in a beehive invented it. If it's more efficient, do it. Everybody wants to improve the user experience. Companies talk about this all the time. And so, they are going to borrow things from one another. And in the end, it's better for the consumer that they do, right? Now, with the new gestures in Android now, I believe they're new. I didn't look at the previous iteration. A lot of the commands, they're the same. The gestures on iOS as they are on Android. And that's great, not because it was stolen. It's great because if I'm an iOS user, I can more easily migrate over to Android and vice versa. And that's the way it should be, I think.
Absolutely. Can Warren or Steve tell us a little bit more about those new multi-finger gestures and, what are we talking about in that sense?
So, there's a lot of similar multi-finger gestures to iOS in, like as I said earlier, the two-finger double tap for doing the magic tap, doing pauses and answering the phone and things like that. That works. And you've got 3-finger and you've got 4-finger gestures. and they're all completely redefinable. So you can define them to whatever you want, and they do cut and paste and various things like that. It's a little bit different to what we're used to, because before multi-finger gestures, I don't know if you remember, Warren, like a two-finger gesture was just a scroll normally. But now if you're on your home screen, for example, it don't just scroll up, it flicks you to the next home screen. So it's slightly different. But you can turn on and off multi-finger gestures as well. So if you don't like them, if you like the old system, you can turn them off and turn them back on. So that's another customization, which is pretty good. But yeah, I mean, multi-finger gestures are good for those people that like them. I quite like them now. Took me a minute to get used to them because I'm more Android than iPhone, but I do like them. Whether they're more efficient, I don't know, because I think tapping with try tapping on a small screen with four fingers is quite tricky. It is. So I'm not sure about multi-finger gestures. Sometimes I turn them off and I think, no, I'm fed up with this. And then I turn them back on to try it again, So I think it's a double-edged sword, really.
I agree. I actually, for a long time, I've been saying I want Apple to bring in more single finger gestures, because I like to hold my phone and use the phone with my thumb. And, so if I want to do the rotor, I have to change my whole, positioning. I have to, use two hands essentially. Whereas on Android, I do know you could do the swipe up down quickly or swipe down up quickly thing. Or I know those square gestures, the L-shaped ones, some people love them and some people hate them, I think it's fair to say. But it's like you say, you want to have options, I suppose, is ultimately the thing. And I think Apple could probably bring in, they have brought some in, like the home gesture and things like that on the newer phones, but I think they've never done multi-directional on iOS, and I'd be interested to see if they might do that.
What I like about Android, I like the whole idea that I could use the system gestures versus totally relying on what the screen reader brings. And that's what we have in Android. And so what you are doing is the same thing that your sighted counterpart is doing. And so, pulling down your notifications, sighted people will just use one finger versus, a blind user, you use two fingers. And that's the same thing. And then, navigating, say I want to go back home and all of that. I know people talk about this angular gestures in Android, and, we have those also built into the screen reader, but I never use any of those because I just use the native gestures instead that I've built into Android. And I think that's the best thing about Android that I like. I don't have to be reliant on using gestures that are from the screen reader itself.
I think for me, Warren, you've hit a nail on the head. You see, TalkBack interferes less with the overall operating system than VoiceOver does. In other words, if you've got VoiceOver on, you can't use any native gestures on iOS. But with TalkBack, you can. You could just turn off the multi-finger gestures and do two fingers versions of the same gestures.
I have actually a question for Warren or Steve, because I'm sure one of you can answer this. I noticed when I was using the Samsung, well, now it's all TalkBack. Apparently, voice assistant's gone. Anyway, scrolling three fingers up, down, left, or right, you can't change those. Is that because scrolling with three fingers is the mainstream gesture, or do you guys not know why?
Sorry, what do you mean you can't change them? I'm not sure. I thought you could.
Not when I set it up. No.
I think this is what Scott is talking about. I think on voice assistant.
Voice assistant.
Sorry, guys. Get the two mixed up. On voice assistant, which is the Samsung deprecated now, I should say, unless, of course, you're getting an older, Android, Samsung Galaxy S9 and lower, then you will have the voice assistant. But now what's happening is that you can change all of that. And I don't know, I'm not used to, the voice assistant. I used to have one J7 or something lying around here. I have no clue where that thing is, but you could, with the new TalkBack, you could change those things. And so they're not necessarily what you want to use, then you could change that, just like what we have. If you don't like the four-finger thing, we have the thing called the pass-through. You could change that to assign that to something else. So it's a nice way of doing things that I think Android is kind of thinking things through well. And I'm excited to see that, I'm running the, developer one on Android 12, and I'm liking the things that I'm seeing. Yes, there are some things that are not quite like what we have on the iOS side of things. Most especially, I think the one that people talk about is like, image description and all of that. We probably will be touching on that. But then I noticed something yesterday on my Android phone that when I come across an image, a label image, a picture of something, it says, tap the more options to find on the top right to find the description of the image. But, I could not find that. So I'm just I think we have some good things coming up.
Can I ask about actions, actually? Because that's one gesture that I love on iOS, where if I'm on, I don't know, a Twitter or in Google News or whatever it might be, it'll automatically set the rotor to actions, and I just swipe up or down to get to the action I want. And I know when I'm using Google News on the Android side, now I'm on Android 10, bear that in mind, it doesn't have that actions. I have to swipe twice for every story. I have the stories headline and then swipe, and it goes to an action button and then swipe. Whereas on iOS, you don't have that extra button, if you follow, because you have the actions menu.
Can I ask what Twitter client? Sorry, are you talking about Twitter, or are you talking about on Google News?
Google News,
what
that
are you talking about?
Yeah, Google News.
Oh, Google News. Yeah, there is a button by each. But I mean, I don't swipe. To be fair, I just explore down the screen. So
and
I just slowly move my finger down the screen.
If you come to Android, with the, the flicking mode that people use on iOS, and, people, we call it swiping on Android. I always say, hey, swiper, no swiper, Door the Explorer. I say, Door the Explorer and try to use things that way, because what happens is that sometimes if you do that, you're skipping over like some contextual thing relating to what you're doing. And there's a room for both, but don't be totally reliant on swiping, because it's not how you do it on Android.
I agree completely, and on the iPhone as well. I never like when I hear somebody swiping 48 times to get to a button when they could have explored at the bottom of the screen. I'm always use the right tool for the situation. For me, things like news feeds are more suitable for swiping, because it just goes down through the list, without missing any. That's my personal preference, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that. Alex, what's your own thoughts on did you have any feelings around the gestures and the different abilities, or do you think it's just what you're used to?
It's definitely partly what you're used to. If you're coming from 10 years on iOS and you're trying Android, you're going to want it to feel like iOS for a while, and vice versa. And that's fair. Everyone does that. But in general, I think, honestly, what Steve was talking about is part of what kind of bugged me about Android when I was trying it. It does rely more on exploring the screen. And while that's great, and I do that a lot, if I have to go to a different tab, I just touch the bottom of the screen where I know the tab is and done. But I don't want that to be the only option. I want there to be still a way for me to swipe through and get to everything if I have to do it, because often UI elements in apps are tiny, and it's very easy to miss them if you're new to the app and you don't know that they exist. Or, as Dave, as you were asking about for actions, if you're in Mail on iOS, I can just touch an email, swipe up, delete it, or mark it or flag, whatever it is. There's a bunch of actions I can get to very easily, whereas with Android, there is either a button for each action that you've got to get past, or there's a separate actions button that you still have to get past, which at least doubles how many swipes you have to do. So if you're someone, maybe you've got a little bit of motor trouble and you can't just reliably go down in a straight line in small enough increments to hit every story or email or tweet, you have to swipe. You're going to have a much harder time of it on Android, at least from what I've seen so far and what I've heard about, than you would on iOS, because iOS has those nice little actions, and they've got the rotor that lets you encapsulate a lot more things in a much smaller space.
To be fair, though, if you want actions on Android, you can just long press. So you can just double tap and hold, and you'll get the same kind of thing. So, exactly. For example, you can just double tap and hold, and then you get delete and all that, and you can swipe through all the actions then. So it's not quite as hard as you're saying, Alex. To be fair.
So did the if you've got that option, do you still have the action buttons that clutter up the screen?
Okay,
you do. Yes.
Let me address a little something here, and something I need to go back to a little bit. Here's the thing that happens on Android. The fact is that these buttons, or whatever, the whole idea for Android, you need to know, and I like that for Android, maybe because I'm the evangelist, I'm trying to evangelize here. But what I like about Android is that those buttons never change. Their location is constant. And once you know that, you know where they are. So, you instead of swiping and try to find it, you know where those buttons are. And if you're writing a tutorial, you could say something like, this button is found at this part of the screen and on this side of the screen, that type of thing. Now, when it comes to email, you have those, reply, whatever, blah, 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 near the top of the screen with every thread that you open. But yet in the same breath, like Steve said, you could long press on it and it'll bring up those actions that you can snooze it or do whatever with it. And it's right there. They're stacked right there. So it's not bad at all. We want to make sure that it has been clarified.
I will say I agree, though, that the iOS actions are very efficient, where you can flick up and down to a particular action, but it's just a different way of doing it. I mean, it's just as easy to double tap and hold and then get your list of actions,
Yeah, I mean, it takes a little bit longer that way, but it definitely does get the job done, I suppose.
Yeah.
I sure wish they would do a Braille display command for that. That's all I could say.
The Braille display is just a huge issue.
There is a Braille display command for long tap and hold, and that's to hold down the enter key.
I'll have to try it. Yeah. I'm going to be reevaluating it actually on a Pixel, which I think is going to be a better experience.
I really think I think you should, Scott, because there's a few commands that might surprise you.
Well, and the other point I wanted to bring up is app availability. I know Seeing AI, at least last I knew, was not on Android, but you do have Envision AI and some other options, right? So it's not like you're not without your choices. They're just not the same.
Loads of them. iPolyvision and ID Pro and loads of them. And often better than Seeing AI as well, actually.
I would say that probably we have more of them on Android than you have on your side of the aisle, really.
Is that possible? Because it feels like a new one comes out every week on the iPhone.
I know.
For instance, Dave, I have I organize my things into folders on my home screen, and in my OCR folder, I have 4 pages, and this is a 4x5 grid. I have 4 pages of nothing but different OCR.
That's
packages.
about 20 apps, isn't it? Yeah.
You really like OCR?
I
There's
do
loads.
because
There's absolutely loads. Yeah.
And in general, I think it's fair to say historically, a lot of apps did come to iOS first. Do you think that's changed? And are they generally, if they're accessible on one, are they generally accessible on the other?
I'm not even sure it's true, because ID Pro came to Android first, and I'm not even sure if it's on iPhone.
Maybe it was just a perception.
SuperSense also came on Android first. And
SuperSense came on Android first, yeah.
And so was Envision as well.
Yeah.
So, see, it's kind of depends on who is doing the app. But I would say that, there's one app that we haven't seen on Android, and that has to be the Seeing AI. I know people have been kind of belly aching about it, and I've straight out said, I don't give a rat about Seeing AI because, frankly, Outlook from Google does a better Lookout, I should say.
Lookout, does a better job.
Lookout does a better job, and it's just amazing app. On the
I want to tell you an amazing thing about Lookout. When it identifies a product, it doesn't just look for the barcode. It takes a picture of the whole product, sends it up to Google, and it tells you exactly what the product is. It's amazing.
And, if you're like a diabetic or something, it talks about, how many whatever calories and things like that. So it helps people to know what they're doing. So I really like Lookout. It's probably my go-to.
They're great apps, those things. I think it's just great to know that there are great options on both platforms, because they are immensely important apps for all of us, I think.
Well, and I guess that was my point. It's not the fact that you don't have the same exact apps, but that was kind of my point, which both Warren and Steve proved, was that, maybe you don't have the same apps on Android and iOS, but you have different apps that can be doing the equivalent, or in some cases better. So it's not like, you're just without options.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate here, I guess. During my experiment with Android, I tried to find, I think, a podcast client and a Twitter client, and I found them. I got a couple recommendations for each. On iOS, you've got a bunch of options. Twitter, maybe not so much, but there are a lot of really good accessible podcast clients out there. I think I got one suggestion for each category on Android, though. And the ones that, were the best ones available at the time just weren't that great. They didn't have a lot of the customizations that the iOS counterparts did. They didn't have a lot of the features. So, just some of the time I definitely ran into a case where there were apps that are accessible, but they weren't as rich, I guess, as the iOS versions.
That is a perception, obviously, but I mean,
accessible.
I've got Podcast Addict, which is a fantastic podcast client. You can do pretty much anything with it. And that is really accessible as well. And the guys care about accessibility as well, because I liaise with them quite a bit. So they always fix accessibility problems. But Podcast Addict is my recommendation for a really good podcast client. Dog Catcher was also good. Strange name, DOGG Catcher. But that's really good too. But Podcast Addict is my real favorite at the moment. So that's what I'd say. By the way, Scott, I just looked up, and also you can press and hold a rooting key for long press as well. So there you go.
Okay. Is that a relatively new one? Because
No, it's always been around.
Weird. Okay. Well, I'm like I said, going back to reevaluate Android on a Pixel. I have not done it on a Pixel yet, so I'm kind of looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a more
shouldn't make a difference.
Experience.
Browback is Browback.
And now, going back to the podcast apps, when we were on iFree, I used to, poke fun at Steve, with that dog catcher. And I said, Steve, you're catching them dogs out there,
That's it. Yeah.
But, I kind of like I kind of like the Google podcast, very simplistic. And
it's a bit basic
something
for me
I use fairly, but my go-to is Pocket Casts, even though there's some issues there. But if you're not doing a lot, you'll be fine with Pocket Casts. But like Steve says, Podcast Addict, I haven't played with that much, but it's very customizable, highly customizable. Podcast app. If anyone is looking for something, could try that. But we have a lot of other podcast apps on Android.
I must check out podcast. I have to say, when I did.
The guys really care about accessibility, which is the main thing for me with Podcast Addict. So that's why I'll keep supporting it.
Yeah, when I had the very similar experience to Alex, but my proper experience was quite a long time ago. So I don't think Podcast Addict was around. I remember I did use Dogcatcher, and at that time it had some issues, but compared to something like Overcast or Downcast, I did find it less good. But I'd definitely be checking out Podcast Addict, because that's all you want. I don't care if it's Overcast. I just care if it's a good app. So
yeah, shoot me any questions, Dave. When you're setting it up, I was happy to help.
Cheers, will do. Another interesting thing, and you alluded to it earlier, Steve, is around voices, because I think it's kind of one of these double-edged sword things again, because I suppose on iOS, Apple would probably argue, okay, you can't get third-party engines, but hey, we give you a lot of different options for free. And then on the Google side, of course, you can do third-party engines, but of course you have to pay for them. So I think it's kind of it's a double-edged sword there. What do you guys think on the voices?
Well, the voice is, you're correct, Dave. You could go for third-party TTS engines, and I think the freedom there. I think one of the things that really put me off on iOS, I'd like to call Fruitvale, is the fact that Samantha actually made me hate iOS.
I hate that woman.
Yes. But it was Samantha. And every time I hear my friends on iOS, they have that Samantha. And I think that pushed me to the Android side of things. And when I discovered that I could have different TTS engines, if I bring up mine here, I probably have like 19 different, whatever on my TTS engine side of things, or voices combined with TTS engines. And so I like that freedom of having if I don't like something, then I use the other one. So I find myself using some for reading books and some for navigation and some for different apps and things like that. And that's what I like about Android.
Do you know what annoys me though about iOS? They don't update their drivers, so they're really old versions of the TTS. So in other words, if I get Vocalizer on, with JAWS, I don't get I get UK Malcolm or other voices that you don't get on iOS. So iOS never updates to the newer voices. So you always get the bad pronunciations and things like that. If you heard some of the the newer Vocalizer voices, they're much better than what you get on iOS. Whereas if you get Vocalizer from Code Factory, for example, you can get all the latest voices, including Malcolm, and you can get all the upgrades and things like that. So I can have all the iPhone voices plus more. So I don't consider it a double-edged sword. I consider it brilliant.
Yeah, I think they have added voices over the years on iOS, in fairness.
Not recently. Not recently.
Range. One thing actually...
Not recently.
I'd be interested, actually, one thing on the Android side. Have they fixed... I remember I had a really irritating bug where when I was using the system voice, when I bring up a keyboard or something, it would change between, so just say I was using the US voice as my main one, and then when the keyboard came up, it would change into a UK voice. This kind of
that usually, Dave, was probably because you have the the language thing, on there. Yeah, so it's recognizing that you are, you have a UK keyboard or something like that, and so it's kind of trying to match that system language. And you could turn that off, in the screen reader area on TalkBack. Also,
if you use the US voice, also, Dave, set the system language to US rather than to system language, and that will solve the problem as well.
It may have been the other way around. I can't remember, but it just struck me as one of those things where I'm like, "No, that wouldn't happen on iOS." When I'm on my iOS,
easy to solve though. Easy to solve.
Yeah, but basically what's going on, it is respecting what your system language is set to, and so that's why that happens.
Yeah, I would want it to respect the voice I chose, not the language.
No, because you've got the voice set to one language and the system set to another.
Yeah.
So Android is being actually better at it.
I'm skeptical on that one, but I understand you can probably get around it, but I'm skeptical on that one. In fairness, now my J6 Plus I've changed over to Vocalizer anyway, but which I think is much better.
Like when I have like a British voice or something like that, and I have to kind of go switch the language if I want a seamless operation. That's how it works.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Alex, what voice do you use actually, and did you Does it bother you? Because some people are really interested in the voices and some people just want any old voice. Or just happy as long as it works.
I will take whatever voice is around if it's usable. Say again?
I say thank you, Alex. Take whatever you can find.
Yeah. I guess if I don't have the option to change it, for instance, on the Apple Watch, you can use the Siri voices, but I don't because they lag a little bit. The only other option is the old compact Samantha, I believe it is. And it's not my favorite voice, but it doesn't bother me to use it either. On Windows, which I use most of the day for work and have gotten used to using for non-work as well, just on the PC side, I use eSpeak, and it's probably my favorite voice ever. If I could have that on Android or on iOS, I would. When I was trying Android, it was the first thing I installed. I just really like the voice. But the iOS selection, again, doesn't really bother me. I tend to use the Alex voice more than any other. The whole breathing thing in the Alex voice struck me as a bit of a gimmick at first, but I'm now used to it, and I kind of appreciate the pauses it gives you between sentences and paragraphs just to delineate them and to let you, kind of mentally pause for that half a second. So I do like that, and I use that voice most of the time. If I had the option, if I could just snap my fingers and make Apple choose one system or the other, I would probably go with the Android way, though. If I want the extra voices, I don't mind paying for them. Maybe Apple would give you one free voice in whichever locale you're in, and then if you want the rest, you can go buy them from Vocalizer, however they would do it. But I'd rather pay for ones I want than get a whole bunch of ones I'll never use and not have the option to use the one that I actually do want.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? It kind of in one topic kind of sums up the difference between the two, doesn't it? The iOS
it kind of does.
Here's your little set of voices, have at it. Whereas Google are like, well, here's a few voices, but if you want more, off you go and get them. So yeah. It's quite interesting. One thing actually, to move it slightly away from the specific accessibility, where I have to say I would like iOS to copy Android a little bit, is the home screens and launchers.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
The app drawer, like they brought us the app library this year, but it's not the same as an app drawer. And I love the app drawer on Android.
Well, and just the ability to, I want to transfer this over to my phone. On iOS, there's a whole lot of, you have to find a workaround to do it. You can just plug your Android phone in and drop it wherever you want it. Dump a bunch of MP3s on your phone, quickly move some APKs maybe you downloaded that you want to install later, so you don't lose track of them. Whatever it is, I mean, that to me is huge, and that was the biggest thing that originally attracted to me to Android, was that ability, and not having to, I got to put it in Dropbox and then use the Dropbox app on my phone. No, you don't have to do any of that with Android. It's just like plugging in a thumb drive, or if you have a memory card reader, throwing a memory card in there. And that's the way I think it should be.
My bugbear with iOS is every time you install something, it insists on putting it on the home screen. But with Android, you can turn that off.
You can turn that off on iOS now. It'll just go into the app library now.
And something that you mentioned, Scott, that launcher, that launcher is a very important thing because, as we said earlier on, we have different manufacturers of Android phones, and that's one of the reasons why I stay with Android, because to be honest, I would be so bored to death, with just one, manufacturer. So what you get, what you see is what you get. So if you don't like, what, Pixel has or whatever, you could go with the Sony phone. But if you don't like the launcher on a Sony phone, or you don't like a launcher on an Asus phone, you could grab a third-party launcher. And I think that's one of the strengths of Android that is often overlooked. And I really like that, because you could get a great phone from some manufacturer and, just dump off their launcher and use the one that you prefer. Use the Google launcher or whatever launcher that you want.
Yeah,
and I like that about Android.
Although my only tiny bugbear is that every time I go to the home screen, it goes Hyperion, which is the one I'm using. I'm like, I know I'm on Hyperion. Leave me.
That's the launcher, though, isn't it? I mean, it's the launcher, though, isn't it? Because we get Pixel launcher when we get on the Pixel launcher.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say was a sighted friend of mine I must admit, she's an Android fan as well. But she said to me that the iPhone launcher still looks the same as it did in the 90s. That's a problem with it as well.
Yeah, so that's the big strength of Android, is that customization. You can totally get rid of everything, from the manufacturer. Most especially, you don't like something, get rid of it. Just get a third-party one instead, and it just works well.
Yeah, no, I have to admit that is brilliant. The other thing, though, to flip the coin then, I suppose, is where iOS tends to get the praise and Android gets the beating sometimes, is around updates, isn't it? Because iOS, you kind of know, I buy a phone and I'll get updates on the day Apple releases them for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah,
Android historically hasn't had that. Has that improved? I know Pixel. I know that's probably one of the reasons you got Steve in particular will tell people to buy Pixel.
I would say buy a Pixel, because you always get the updates on day one, and you get the updates for not as long as iPhones, though. You only get them for 3 years, whereas the iPhones do it for 4 or 5 years, it would appear. But even with a Pixel, as I say, even some updates are fragmented. For example, in the US, you've got TalkBack 9.1. We haven't got it yet. We'll probably get it in the March security patch, but we still haven't got it yet. But so it still frustrates me that Android is so fragmented, even within the Pixel.
So here's my question about operating systems and all that. With Android, are you still able to, let's say you hate something in the latest Android release and it's terrible, can you revert back to the previous version somehow, like through your computer or something?
Yeah,
See, there's a big point for Android over iOS, because
now here's what happens. You can actually go back to the very first operating system that came out with that phone, especially on the Pixel. So like for instance, I do have a Pixel 2. If I want to revert it to the very first operating system that came on my Pixel, I could do that.
Is that easy to do? Because
yes,
sometimes with Android there are things you can do, but your ordinary person on the street probably wouldn't, because
No.
they wouldn't know how.
Google has simplified that by something that's called a flashing tool, and it's an online thing. You plug your phone in and go choose the one you want to revert to and click on it, and just it will do it automatically for you. You don't have to know any ADB or anything like that, and you have it. And that's how it is. It's been like that since last year, and so very interesting feature.
And that's the way it should be, you know, and that's just part of my issue, and has always been my issue with iOS is, well, so you don't like iOS 7 or iOS whatever you're running, you know, 14.4, too bad. That's what you get.
You can go back for a little while, can't you, Scott? And then when they take it down, when they take the operating system down, you can't go back. So now you've got 14.4. You could have gone back to 14.3 for about a week.
Yeah, they stopped signing us after.
I'm like, get me back on 12, please. I am. I'm running iOS 12.4.1 on my 10R. And I refuse to upgrade it. I would love to take advantage of the security features and all these things that are coming along in 14. I can't, because then I can't write a full email if I need to. And professionally, that's what I have to do. I do a lot of things on the go. So what do I do at this point? Support is being dropped for apps. You know, and that's, again, one of those things where Android actually comes out ahead is, well, you can update TalkBack and BrailleBack separately. So if you don't necessarily like the latest release, I'm assuming you can also revert that. Something else you can.
Unroll
absolutely.
That. Unroll.
Yeah.
Okay, Scott, I must insist you say something nice about Apple now.
Me? I never say anything nice. I don't know.
It's kind of hard.
You're confusing me with somebody. I'm sorry, Dave.
but you know, here's what I've always said about, you know, you guys, it's aisle of the, you know, side of the aisle, you know, all those updates, you know, if it becomes available today, it's available for everyone. But like Steve says, you know, sometimes even on our Pixel phone, someone may get it and the other person may not get it. And that's one thing. And we're talking Google here. Yeah. Google needs to fix that, because it's absolutely annoying.
Yes, I agree. And that's the one really good thing about Apple is everyone can get the update whenever they want it. So there's your nice thing about Apple.
Yeah, my Google's coming up. How can I help? Yeah. But that's one of the issues that we have on Android, is the fact that the updates are not consistent, and even when they're there, not everybody gets them. Sometimes other people may wait for a week or two before it even hits their device, and that shouldn't be. I mean, coming from Google, come on.
Friend of mine who's an engineer, he said both operating systems suck. You just got to find the one that sucks least for you.
That's a good guide to life generally. All right, yeah. Is there anything else we've missed, or I think we've covered quite a lot there. And
before we close though, I did want to ask if either Warren or Steve have tried the Braille screen input. I have not, but I use the iOS version constantly. I've always said since it came out that it's the best thing Apple's done for my use of a mobile device since VoiceOver itself. I use it all the time. I rely on it. It's amazing. Yeah. So how is the Android version, and does it compare? Is it as good? Is it better? Is it worse? What do you think?
I'd say it's as good. And also there is a little tutorial, isn't there, Warren? Again, they've got a little Braille screen input tutorial to teach you how to do it. So again, that's another good thing.
Now, so here's what the Braille keyboard is, or, you know, TalkBack Braille keyboard, as it is called. Now, when it first came out, all we had was just one mode, you know, so you had to hold the phone in the landscape mode, and then you have the dots 1, 2, 3, you know, on the left side, or, you know, 4, 5, 6 on the other. You can revert those dots as you wanted. But the thing that I was talking about was you know, we should have something like what I call a lap mode. And so now we have something called a table mode. So I could be in the car and I'll put it down. So it's just a familiar feel like on your Perkins Braille. And that's the mode that I like. And I tell you, I can Braille as quickly as I could on my Perkins Braille with it. And I really love that. And it's something that's so nice to have finally on Android. And so it works very well.
Fantastic.
And Warren, have you used the iOS version at all?
No, the iOS version, to be honest with you, I just couldn't make heads or tails of it, so I just quit it. But Steve probably could address that better than I. But I really like the one I
I've
have.
used both. I've used both, but I don't like either. I'm not mad on Braille screen input. I
Really?
prefer a proper. Yeah, I prefer a proper Braille display.
Wow.
So I'd sooner have a Braille display slung around my neck, which is what I tend to do, and have the phone in my pocket.
Now,
And
Steve, have you tried the table mode on
no, I haven't. No.
Yeah, you should, because what that does for me, it just simulates what we have on the Parkins braillers. So, my 1, 2, 3 on my left, and, my index finger on my dot 1 and my right index finger on my dot 4. And it just feels natural that way as to, the
I'll definitely try it.
I don't like that other way. Yeah.
Yeah. I also have one more question before we close. Can we do one on Apple Watch versus Android Watch one day as well?
Oh, of
that's
course, the
interesting.
watch. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Well, the point about it is, I've got a Mobvoi watch. This a Chinese company, Mobvoi, and it's fantastic. And although my wife has got an Android watch, and I think the Mobvoi is just as accessible, and in fact, it does. It does things that I can't find a way of easily to do on the Android watch, because like on the Apple Watch, like, having the heart rate constantly updated, your heart rate constantly updated on the home screen. So, for example, if I
6 degrees Celsius, none, 1292 step, 2019, 300.
where is it?
1292, none, 6 degrees Celsius, 103.
Oh, 103. Why is my heart rate?
So have we got you all riled up, Steve?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you must have.
I think maybe Steve is eating something there.
So no, it must be because I've drunk too much beer. But to get notifications, you just flick up.
Notifications, clear.
And you,
Sky News 22 minutes. Sky News, watch the moment unexploded second World War bomb.
that's Sky News. Clear the notifications as usual. And I can't find anything that you can't do really on an Android watch that you can do on an Apple Watch. And of course, you've got the voice commands as well. So you've got the G lady. I'm not going to say the word because it will wake everything up in the house. You've got her on there and things like that. You've got the assistant on the watch as well. And just having, notifications on my wrist when my phone's in another room is lovely. And I've got all the health. So I've got Google Fit on there, Fit Breathe, Fit Guidance, Fit Workout. And that's just as accessible as iOS as well. So it's just worth mentioning that.
Absolutely. It sounds from that very quick intro to it, it sounds very similar, actually, I have to admit. It's hard to say there's much between them from what I could hear there, and it sounded responsive as well.
So then, I've not used an Android Wear. Is that what it is? Is it Wear OS?
Android Wear, yes.
OS,
Yeah.
Wear OS,
I haven't used a Wear OS device at all. I've used an Apple Watch for years, though.
Yeah.
Steve, how much experience do you have with the Apple Watch? Like how, I guess not how similar are they, but in terms of accessibility, how extensively have you studied the Apple Watch to see what all it can and can't do?
Reasonably, I would say. I mean, as I say, my wife has got an Apple Watch, so I get a chance to play with it sometimes, and things like that. And pretty much like you say, the Siri voice is a little bit laggy. So if you leave it at compact Danny or whatever, which is what we get in the UK, that's fine. But it struck us. It struck my wife as well, who's she's into iOS, so we're fairly balanced in this house, and she's saying to me as well, they're both just as accessible again. Yeah.
And you can also install other voices, just like you could, or TTS engines on that watch, like you would on your regular Android phone, and that's another good thing.
Not so easily, Warren, because they're not on the Play Store.
No. But you could use that ADV to install that, and so if you want, you could install Eloquence on it if you know what you're doing.
Yes, that's right.
I'd say Eloquence might be a bit heavy. But,
that'd be another reason I would look at Android as Eloquence. It's because of my hearing impairment. I assume that's why. It's still the only thing I prefer, and it's mostly probably because I grew up with it. My question is, I'm afraid I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there any Braille support on the Android watches?
No.
Darn.
No. Although, you could probably install Brailleback with ADB, but I don't know how well it would work.
ADB, yeah, you should be able to install Brailleback on it.
Yeah, I've
That
never
would be
tried it.
interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to try.
I'm going to ask on our list and see if anyone has it and see what their experience is, but I'm almost positive you could do that.
Yeah.
And here's a question I think that probably a lot of people are asking. Not that I'm like the spokesperson for everyone. Be glad of that. But a lot of people might ask the question, okay, well, we have AppleVis for iOS. What kind of resources are out there for Android for things like apps and, podcasts, tutorials, that sort of thing? I know, Warren, you were working on Inclusive Android. Are you still updating that, or are there other resources that people can look into?
Well, what happened with Inclusive, I don't know what really happened, but the problem that we ran into is the fact that you go to submit things on Inclusive Android, and then, it's so limited. And so it's just basically the site's kind of like fallen to the wayside. I hate to say that, but it seems that's the case. But it's a great place, repository that we had wanted it to be for users of Android. And so from there, things just spiraled. And so everyone does their own thing. And so, hence the reason why, most especially even with the falling away of the iSphere list, that's why, I started my own, I think we call it NTAT at the time, and then it went to NTAT. And now we are blind Android users. And that's where we have also a lot of former iSphere members and, very active list. But we don't have, a place where you could just go and get apps like you would, like we did on Inclusive Android. And that's what we're trying to do with our blind Android users site. And so we have the blindandroidusers.com, and it's still a work in progress. And we are, we do a weekly podcast. We just finished one before I came to this one. And so we are, our dream is to have it look like Inclusive Android, where, people could go there and find recommendations or, tutorials, written or audio ones, and go from there. And, Steve is also having some effort there at his end. So it's all over the place.
Is there any plans for a forum? Because I think that's one of the real strengths of AppleVis, if I may say so, is that you can very easily post a question without having to subscribe to a very heavy email list, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and that's what we do on our blind Android users mailing list. Like I said, lately it's the Samsung, because Samsung's updating, merging that talkback, into Samsung. And so we've got over almost 1,000, emails about, it's so amazing.
I will say though, I don't know why, how can I put this? I don't know why it's needed, in a sense that you don't have JAWS Viz, you don't have NVDA Viz, you don't have, Linux Viz as such. You don't really have, because AppleVis has become a good site for iOS, do you really need a website where you need to go and find answers? If I want an answer about Android, I just Google it.
Or go to the Play Store. Yeah.
Yeah, or go to the Play Store. Yeah. So if I want an accessibility answer,
the strength of AppleVis, though, like I mentioned earlier on when I started out here, or when we introduced ourselves, like when I was first starting out with my 3GS, that was the one I got. And frankly, I was kind of a little bit lost. And I think it was someone directed me to the AppleVis. And so I see the strength of it from like the tutorial side of things. I think that's excellent. And that's what Inclusive Android was for before falling to the side. Now though, like I said, we have our ongoing, but there'll always be someone that can tell you, ask on a mailing list, and someone will tell you about it. But yeah, it would be nice to have something like that. I think that's really good on the Apple side of things.
And the way I kind of see this too is there's more of a need for a website to help you with an entire platform than there is for a specific screen reader, only because once you know the screen reader commands, you can more or less get around most common applications. The arrows, the tabs,
take your point, but where's the platform for Windows then?
Well,
where's the website for Windows?
I don't know. I guess what I'm saying now.
I really don't think you need it because Google is so good. You can search for pretty much anything you want and find it. And, Google support articles are really good on TalkBack. So you can learn TalkBack by going to Google support articles. So my personal view is that you don't need it.
Well, so here's one example that I ran into. I read the TalkBack articles on, and again, this was a year or two ago, so it may be different now. But when I read on how to, say, answer a phone call, it was talking about, well, you have to do this, but make sure you're on this part of the screen or it's not going to work. And I asked somebody about it and they're like, oh, no, that's completely wrong. You can just do this. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it's stuff like that where things can get outdated so quickly where, things are, there's a trick that someone found that maybe isn't in the official documentation. Stuff like that is kind of where a site like AppleVis or AndroidVis, so to speak, would come in really handy. And there's also the apps to consider, is this app accessible? What are the tricks to use this or that? That's also a good resource to have is, should I even spend money on this app or bother playing with it? Or is it just not going to work with TalkBack at all? Stuff like that is also helpful.
To be honest, I'd sooner people put those sort of things up on the app reviews because then the app developers get to know about it. If you have an AppleVis, like if you have an AppleVis, the developers are not going to look at AppleVis. They're going to, they're going to be ignorant of, our app is not very accessible. So what, but if you put that on the review on the Play Store or the App Store, then they see it and they hopefully do something.
I don't think that's an either or,
but I won't.
In fairness. That's, I think you can leave good reviews, but it's, if you just want to know if something's accessible, trying to trawl through loads of reviews versus just look it up on a website. I'm not saying you have to have, there should be something like Inclusive Android, but it's more just, if it was there, it would be beneficial. What I mean? I don't think there's a downside.
No, but if I want to know something's accessible, I just install it and try it.
Yeah.
Unless you have to buy it, of course. And of course, with Google, you can get a refund after 24 hours anyway.
Yeah, and then there's one nice thing about Google
as well.
I can see, where both sides are. And for me, I think probably usually maybe what apps people are recommending, of course, one could always try it on their own. But I think if someone has been down that road, they could recommend or say, hey, here's my experience with such and such an app. And here are my findings about it. So it kind of helps one to determine whether or not they should install such an app or not. And so I can see where that could come in very handy, where the AppleVis comes in and where the inclusive Android was. But like Alex was saying, there's some reviews out there that people put, and that will also go back to, back what Steve is saying, most especially when someone says about how to answer Android calls, and that was just not right. And so those are type of things we're trying to prevent people from, putting out, false information there. And I hear that, perpetuating ever on Android, saying, oh, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. And it's just usual people who are not familiar with it and just put out whatever they want to put out there.
Yeah. And I mean, it's why there's so many, I'm sure we're all subscribed to all sorts of different mailing lists, and it's, they're there because they are useful to people. So yeah, I think it's just an interesting thought, I guess. I think we're probably good to wrap up, guys, are we?
Yeah, I think so.
Great stuff. So firstly, I want to thank both Warren and Steve for braving it and being willing to come on the AppleVis podcast and discuss Android. It's been really great to have you on. So thanks both very much for coming.
Welcome.
Thank you, David. And you know what? We should do this again, most especially with Android 12. Maybe sometime in the summer, could we do this again?
I'm sure we could do something again. Yeah, absolutely.
I love you guys.
If people want to find you guys, it's blindandroidusers.com. Is that correct?
blindandroidusers.com is our website, and people could subscribe to our email list, which is blindandroidusers plus subscribe at groups.io.
Fantastic. And Steve, you are over at comproom.co.uk, correct?
Comproom.co.uk, and I've just posted a blog post that's on there interesting about Android and notification delays. So go and have a look at that. If you want to know more about that, hit me up because it's quite an interesting topic. And you can also find me on Twitter at Talking Droid, all one word.
Brilliant.
And our Twitter handle is at Blind Droid Users. So just at Blind Droid Users.
Great stuff. And you know where to find Alex, Scott, and myself over at applevis.com. Alex and Scott, thanks so much for joining me as well.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for a great discussion, everybody. I appreciate everyone's time and putting together what I hope is going to be a real educational thing for all of our users.
Yeah, agreed. I really enjoyed the chat. So thank you, everybody. And thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
This AppleVis podcast has been brought to you by the community of AppleVis.com. For the latest in resources and tips and tricks to get you the best experience from your Apple device, visit www.applevis.com.